This is going to be a wonderful continuation of the last discussion. We're definitely going to focus on data. We're definitely going to focus on electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. We might not get into flying cars in this discussion. No flying cars. But I have the distinct pleasure of calling up onto the stage Ashley Horvat, who's the Vice President of Public-Private Partnerships with Greenlots, and Anna Jaffe, who's the CEO of Mobi Systems, to talk about electric vehicles and EVs and the transportation of the future. So why don't you please join me on stage. Thank you so much. So as we get started, I think both of you have some prepared remarks, and so I won't set the stage too much, but Ashley, you've got some slides to walk us through some of the ideas that Greenlots has about charging infrastructure and electric vehicles in the future, and why don't you take it away from there?
Yeah, absolutely, and apologies, I wasn't able to be here yesterday to get the foundation of knowledge that I'm sure was exhibited. I've been fascinated by all of the information that's been contributed today for data, as a data geek myself and public-private partnership geek as well. I'm just sort of in my element and soaking it all up. So I will begin with that. So I had the pleasure of meeting with some of the folks from CPS Energy, Paula, Felicia, and Kimberly last year during an EPRI conference. And if you've been tracking the electric vehicle industry at all, you've seen quite a bit of transformation. I've been in the industry for about a decade. So I've been there from the beginning of this chart, essentially, what you see here. So in early 2000 or late 2010, the Nissan Leaf and Chevy Volt were introduced. And so those were the two most the modern iteration of the electric vehicle industry. And so from there to basically 2018, we've seen rapid acceleration of electric vehicle adoption, and not just in coastal cities, we've seen it throughout. And so a lot of that is driven by introduction of new models from manufacturers. So you may have seen quite a bit of announcements from different automakers, pretty grand proclamations, essentially, of what the technology is going to look like of the future, and the automakers have been pushed on one hand from a regulatory standpoint. My background was in that, where I was in the regulatory space on the public side, but essentially they've been investing in R&D and putting out some really fascinating models with longer range battery electric vehicles. We've seen a growth in hybrid, but really the preference has actually been leaning more towards battery electric vehicles. And so we're seeing more long range cars such as the Chevy Bolt with a B, and of course Tesla, as you all know, and I think some of the misconception is that it's for upper echelon of income, but the automakers are coming out with more and more affordable cars. So globally we have 150 EV models available, and Bloomberg has projected that by 2040 over 50% of the vehicles that we see out there today will be electric. So make no mistake, this is happening. You may have noticed my company Greenlots was acquired a few weeks ago by Shell. It's actually a really good logo. I'm kind of, as a brand geek as well, I think it's been kind of crazy to see that on my name. But you know, it's really a signal and where the industry is moving. Shell New Energies has committed to invested $2 billion next year into their new energy space, and Greenlots is part of that play. So we'll be essentially the mobility platform for anything Shell does in this space. So taking that to how do we get to electric for all and scaling the technology that we're bringing to bear, as well as everybody else within the industry, for the masses. And really that's kind of been my MO for the last 10 years, is how do we take a grandiose idea and take those different points and coalesce them between the public sector and the private sector when you're dealing with data issues, technology in the vehicles, technologies in the vehicle or in the infrastructure themselves. And then you overlay that with all of the permitting and city infrastructure that exists today, and needing to scale at a rapid pace, along with changes in mobility like Uber and Lyft and all of these other technologies. So we're sort of at the confluence of all of that. But essentially, the underlying issue that we've been seeing with electric vehicle adoption is lack of infrastructure, which seems very obvious, but really it's one of the key barriers that prevents mass adoption. And so that's where I have been investing my time, is in DC fast charging infrastructure, as well as level 2 for residential and some workplace and multi-unit dwellings. So this chart shows you basically how many charging stations Electric Edison Institute projects that we will need to achieve 7 million EVs on the road. They project that we'll need 5 million EV infrastructure points, so it's quite a bit of work to be done considering how long it takes to get the infrastructure in, getting through the process of site acquisition, all of those things. So it's going to take residential charging, government, cities, also heavy-duty charging. We announced a partnership with Volvo. So within a cityscape, you really need to have electrification beyond just the typical light-duty passenger vehicle if we are to achieve widespread electrification, not just in the vehicles themselves, but in buses and all sorts of other modes of transportation. So I'm just going to try to briefly get through this. I know we have a short amount of time, but I think what I wanted to bring back is some of my older experience, which is engaging communities in different ways. And I've been really heartened to hear some of the discussion that kind of speaks more to the physical manifestation of technology and really getting in communities and getting people both in viewing the technology but also experiencing it themselves. And when we developed the West Coast Electric Highway on the West Coast, part of that really put us into rural communities throughout the state of Oregon and Washington. And what that did is we interfaced with tribes, which you see here in this picture. We partner with USDOT, USDOE, tribes, local communities, and bringing in the charging infrastructure. And that in and of itself gives you the ability to help scale because you're partnering with others that can do the work that you need done, but you can't do it on your own. And that's really where we found is amplifying both the driver experience as well as the community experience with bringing in these new vehicles into the communities that hadn't otherwise experienced it. So this just kind of gives you an overlay of what the driver experience will be in terms of where you'll charge both at home, publicly, potentially workplace, just making sure that everybody has access. And I think part of the SMART SA number one goal as far as access, that could be defined in multiple ways. But in my mind, when I think of access, I think of having access to infrastructure regardless of whether you're renting, purchasing, and also making sure that as a private sector that we are providing charging at a really reasonable rate across different use cases. So having that software technology that can basically charge different prices dependent upon what the users are. We've been talking to Uber and Lyft and other TNCs to kind of look at who are the drivers, where are they coming from. Maybe it doesn't make sense to put it right in the city. Where do they live? Do they live outside of the city, putting it on the peripheries? So those are some of the data points that we think about when we think about access. I'm going to speed through this, but this just shows you some pictures, and I'm happy to talk to everybody, but these are some outreach activities that we did with the community and involving others and sort of expanding our reach, partnering with non-traditional companies that you wouldn't think about, like wineries and just other tourism entities to help bring that market messaging and transforming the transportation space beyond just the typical cadre of people that would be discussing these issues. So I'm going to skip ahead through some of this, but this just shows you a spectrum of utility investment in this space. So in terms of a smart cities, smart communities, I like to say portfolio, we really look at it as you need to be electrifying the TNC fleets. So in Seattle, Lyft just announced that you have an option to select a green option. So when I pull up my app, I can select an electric vehicle. And then you need to also, from a city perspective, invest in your fleets and really, really put your investment into making sure that you're practicing what you preach. And then beyond that, of course, transit and light-duty vehicles. So I think I'm going to skip ahead through all of this, but we do have some really interesting case studies that I'm happy to share with everybody on what we did with the City of LA and answer any questions there, work with the Los Angeles Police Department and others. And I think everybody has spoke to this quite eloquently in terms of where we're at with the confluence of both smart communities and mobility, and we're here to help accelerate that transformation because we need to get more of these vehicles out there. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ashley. And you spoke very eloquently yourself about partnerships. And as we're thinking about the electric vehicle partnership, the charging infrastructure partnership, it's essential to have that conversation in conjunction with data and conjunction with what's coming with autonomous vehicles. And so Anna, why don't you share a little bit about Moby Systems and some of the things that you're working on in New England and Boston specifically and around the country?
Okay, I made my slides not at all about my company.
Oh, great. Well, that's even better. So,
We are working on, so we have a platform, I guess to give you the 30-second answer. We have a platform that does data aggregation, intermodal routing across all ground modes and everything a person needs to do. Whole day planning, not just A to B, but basically A to everything. Execution monitoring, understanding once you step out into the world it changes. And so how do you stay with someone through that experience? Fleet optimization, so all kinds of technology. But I actually had more of a question coming here because we've tried to work with a number of cities, and I saw that this conference was sponsored by, basically in part by a utility. I thought, excellent, I can just go and ask a question. So on the slide behind me, there's a picture of the city, of buildings, right? We talk about connected car, the data that comes off, I think you mentioned IoT, which is cool. I'd actually never heard that term before. But all these sort of safe data sources. From my perspective, right now, that isn't our intelligence. So connected car, it's about 70 gigabytes a day. Our DNA is about 1.6 gigabytes. Our brain, depending on how you count and all our neurons, it's somewhere between 10 gigabytes and 100 terabytes. And that means that the population of San Antonio is 241,599 petabytes of data. So you are the smart city. The residents of the city are the smart city. We are the smart city. My slide is stuck. Oh, sweet, okay. So the question that I have is, how do we make a city that is as gorgeous as a galaxy, as tuned in as an owl, as sensitive and self-sustaining as a forest? And I think pretty much one of the reasons, actually, the other reason I came here is when I read the summary for the conference, it said people. I was like, thank God. So everything we do with my company, Moby, is about putting the person back at the center in this sort of emerging age of artificial intelligence. In the utility industry, lots of people, there's a lot of momentum around this idea of negawatts, right? How do you deliver what people want? They want cold beer, they want hot showers. I saw an RMI person here, yay. And they don't really care about the distribution. They don't really care about the big power plant. I think someone said, use data, then you didn't have to build a big power plant. We've really struggled as a company to make that same argument in the mobility space, that what people want is access to their friends, access to their family, access to community. That actually, when we look from a data perspective at mobility infrastructure, at EV, at AV, we actually see tons of infrastructure and tons of capacity. But it's a real struggle to get a city to understand that actually they can use information to create sort of nega miles, to move people and connect them to what they need and want, using efficiency and using insight and using the people themselves to drive how they access the things that they care about. So I guess I'm going to stop there. I'd love to continue the conversation with anyone who wants to talk to me after and answer any of the questions that Chris poses.
Yeah, well, I think that is, such a beautiful encapsulation of putting people first. We use data to underpin all of what the future looks like, but it's going to be about driving those outcomes. And so as the two of you think about what the outcomes should be for cities, for people, for communities, how can cities and utilities and businesses partner together right now to create the transportation system of the future? And I'll start with you, Anna.
Sure. So my feeling is, or our feeling as a company, is that mobility needs to be driven by what people need and want. And as a result, digital tools need to be able to solve for that. They can't you don't just type in what you're doing next, not just coming here. Later today, I'm going to hunt down a geode and find a Thai massage and explore San Antonio. And I'm here without a car, and I don't have a tool. There's no tool that will help me do that. I have to use my brain, and my brain's competent. But so I wish that cities would take some ownership of that digital experience, would say, we want you to be able to access our small businesses. We want you to be able to do discovery that isn't just Walmart. We want you to find the things in the city that you didn't know existed. And I know that that's tricky. I know every city we've talked to said, but I need my bus to run on time, and that takes all my effort. And I said, okay, I understand, but the $2 billion you're about to spend on the extension of a green line in Boston, what if you took 0.01% of that and built a real digital experience division inside the city? And we can help you. We can provide you all the intelligence, and we can help you find other companies, if you dislike us, to provide you that intelligence. But the touch point with the citizen that is their digital tool, that is the phone that's in their pocket, that connects the city operator to that person's brain, I think it's one of the most powerful and underused assets, and it shouldn't just be passed off to Transit or Citymapper or Uber or Lyft. It should be something that cities start to really, despite digital not being necessarily a historical forte, own and really take time to consider.
That's great. Ashley, any thoughts particularly on the electric vehicle side?
Yeah, no, I have thoughts about the beer too. I was like, beer, or people having fun. I loved all your sides. Owls. I come from the Northwest. I live in Seattle, so I was in heaven there. But no, in terms of the city, I was really fascinated by what the city of San Antonio was discussing about health, and I think reframing the conversation, it wasn't mentioned, but economic health, I think, leads to other health outcomes. And so I think, you know, as a former public sector employee that kind of misses that side of things, but also as a private sector, I think I appreciate the need to speak different nomenclature languages too. When you were saying the mentioning, that's not your language, I hear that all the time in my space, and sort of using the right political line and disadvantaged communities and access and all of those things, where I'm trying to make it work from a business model perspective to make it sustainable for not just our company, but for the industry, because we want to see this succeed well into the future, and we want to see cities succeed. So economic health, I think cities should continue to consider that. It was mentioned earlier, the vendor issue and sort of repeat vendor offender type of a thing, and I think I just kind of coined that, you know, it's like, but no, for, yeah, I know, it's like, but for us, you know, we at Greenlots, and just me in general in the industry, believe really strongly in open standards, and it's, you know, you can choose what standard that is, but you really need to have that flexibility of choice, because I will tell you, we were putting out 50 kilowatt fast chargers in 2010. We're still putting them out, but now we're up to 150, 350. You still need the conduit and all the same power infrastructure essentially, but it's got bigger implications for the grid and just site locations. So you really need the ability to have flexibility and choice, and by that you need open standards, and you need the ability to switch from Greenlots to another network, or switch from one of the manufacturers that you've selected in your charging network to another manufacturer, because even some of the bigger charging companies are coming in and out of the space. So it's really critical as a city to think long-term, not just about one particular vendor. And like was said earlier, allow yourself to make mistakes. You know, the political winds are shifting so much lately too. I think as a private company, we're trying to take the long game. And the data questions come up both in Canada and the US, and one of the things that we're looking at is we're hearing from people in Canada, like, can we trust, you know, your data being stored in the US, and what are the implications of that? And so we're having to store data in Canada that's just Canadian, and there's just all these different policy and data implications to track. And as a startup growing and everything, it's just important that a city realizes that need for growth, so. Yeah.
Well, that's a great point. And as we wrap up, two-part question here. How can utilities, cities, businesses avoid that creepiness factor when it comes to all the data that we're collecting, and still be innovative, and still create that human-centered place that we live and breathe and move around in?
Our answer for that is that whenever we have data insights on an individual, those insights just go back to them, unless it's about infrastructure. If it's about infrastructure, that infrastructure belongs to the infrastructure. But if it's about the person, those insights belong to their experience and how we route or plan or optimize for what they do. And so far, that I think has been effective in minimizing creepiness. We also work with huge hotels and OTAs And in those cases, then the company itself owns its data, just like the city of San Antonio would own its own. And we don't necessarily, like, there's been a lot of conversation around localization. We don't necessarily pass insights even between cities. I think so far we've been really just conservative about it and said there's a lot of knowledge in San Antonio about San Antonio. There's a lot of knowledge inside yourself about who you are. And that gets us plenty far in terms of our ability to solve mobility or infrastructure question.
Thank you.
Yeah, for us, the creepiness factor is ever looming. But I was listening to the last talk about befuddled researchers just baffled at why we're not sharing data, because that happens. NREL hits me up all the time for data. As a company, we're considering that, but also I was meeting with Seattle. We're kind of looking at different TNC programs, and they're trying to figure out actually legislatively what they can and can't look at. Like, they're like, don't share that part of data, but can we converge these two pieces so we can not spend a bunch of money to create this new system for collecting certain data? And so I guess it's, for me, and it's sort of like enlightening and sitting in that meeting with these city people within Seattle City Light and others. I think it comes down to people and hiring the right people at the city, because you can create structure, you can create programs, you can create policies, but you need the people within the city to implement those and carry those forward. And I've been so happy to like meet cities throughout the country, Ann Arbor, I mean everywhere, where you have genuine people working for the city that want to ensure that they're doing the right thing, and I think ultimately that's what it's going to come down to. But yeah, we need to create the best structures in place to facilitate that and nudge theory. But yeah, it comes down to making sure you got the best talent in the city with that believe wholeheartedly in the mission of the city, not just the mission of the technology.
Well, Ashley, Anna, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I think we can go out as the smart city ourselves, as you so rightly pointed out, and create that really beautiful galaxy of sustainable, connected communities through electric vehicles, through autonomous vehicles, and through mobility in a much more thoughtful way. Thank you. Yeah, we'll do a high five up here. Yeah. All right.